Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our first episode of Off the Cuff with Monmouth Ocean Regional Realtors. Today, I have Sean Thompson and Mike Imbriaco, two real estate professionals, two neighbors, and two friends. And today, we're going to talk about the biggest headline that hit the real estate industry on March 15th when National Association of Realtors announced their settlement agreement on the lawsuit. The previous defendants had already agreed to settle and have been moving forward. With the news that NAR was settling, came a whole slew of changes that will affect our industry nationwide. But more importantly for New Jersey, it will now require us to utilize buyer agency agreement. Currently, there are 18 states across the nation that currently use buyer agency agreements and haven't had any problems since they move forward with them. But for New Jersey, what does that mean? So today I've got two guys here that are going to share their thoughts and their insights as to the way we see the future of our business going forward. So Mike, just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do.
Sure. Grew up in Neptune, Monmouth County. I currently reside in Wall Township. Actually, Sean, as Robert just stated, we live 2 doors away from each other. I followed him. He moved from Parker Hills first. And then I surely followed him after about a year later. So I have dual careers. I'm a real estate agent. I've been licensed for 10 years, since 2014. And I'm also a certified tax assessor in New Jersey. And I'm the assessor in 3 municipalities. I've been certified for 15 years, and I've been working in the tax assessing field for about 18 years.
Okay, Sean, how about you?
Sean Thompson. I grew up in the small town of Avon by the sea, not Avon, that's Avon. Got into real estate license back in 2016. Really started diving into real estate back in 2003. Started buying little investment properties, so that's kind of how I got into real estate initially.
One of the reasons why I asked these two guys to join me today is because they are somewhat of influencers themselves, right? Mike, I'm sure many of our members will recognize Mike when they see this podcast for his little 45 to 60 second stories that he shares right behind the driver's seat of his car. And, you know, he gives great information in terms of home inspections, tax assessments, you know, working with buyers, working with sellers. He does the occasional rant on an agent here and there, but it's great information, and he's got a great group of followers that follow him on almost everything he does. Sean, on the other hand, he too is a pretty big influencer as well, for those of you in Monmouth County. And he takes a different approach and utilizes his family when he's, you know, talking about a home inspection or talking about, you know, working with buyers or sellers. But he also utilizes his wife and kids in those videos, you know, to promote his listings, his sales, and everything else. So that's kind of why I asked these two guys to join me today, because I think you'll recognize them from their social influence across Monmouth and Ocean counties. So with that, let's get started. And you know, as I said, March 15th, you know, just broke headlines across the nation on the announcement that NAR had, you know, proposed a settlement for the 2019 lawsuit, home sellers lawsuit that came against both NAR and several other large real estate brands. So with that announcement came the rules or the changes that were needed to occur in order for that settlement to be approved by the courts. And one of the biggest changes is the fact that now we will have exclusive buyer representation, meaning you won't be able to represent a buyer without having a document signed. So with that, you know, and the headlines read for the next couple of months like this was going to be the end, and you know, compensation was going to be reduced, home sales were going to be reduced. And, you know, so from that perspective, like, first, what are you guys doing to prepare for the upcoming changes? Because, again, buyer agency agreements go into effect August 17th of this year. So what are you guys doing to prepare to be able to utilize those agreements?
Well, I think the first thing is you got to start having a conversation with your buyer, your current buyers that you're working with, to let them know what's going to happen in about 2 months from now.
If they don't find a house before.
Correct. And that is actually triggering some people to try and
Yep,
rush
absolutely.
their pace along.
Right.
But you know, it's the buyer agency agreement in its current state right now is a little long. It's 6 pages, so it takes a little bit to go over it with a buyer.
And I will just tell you that New Jersey Realtors is continually, they're listening to the members' feedback and they're continually modifying it. So
Sure.
by the time it gets rolled out by August 17th or gets approved later on, we'll talk about that. But once it does, it should be shortened. And I would imagine that most large brands will probably come out with their own version as
Yeah,
well.
I think my company is in the process of doing the same. But you know, it's like a a listing. You go and you sit down with a seller, you negotiate some terms, right? So same thing's gonna maybe happen with buyers. Buyers are presumably gonna start maybe interviewing more than one real estate agent. It's probably not ever been the case where they decided to talk to a handful of real estate agents to decide who they're gonna work with on a buyer's end. But that may certainly be the case. And I gotta be honest, I mean, when this lawsuit came out, I was annoyed and aggravated, and as time has gone on, I actually think it's a godsend because it's, the strong are going to survive,
Right.
and I think it's going to benefit the industry because there's going to be, I don't want to say better, but there's going to be more equipped real estate agents that'll be able to assist buyers in a stronger fashion than maybe a part-timer. And Sean and I started as part-timers,
Right.
and we're no longer part-timers, and that's not to rein in on the parade of somebody that's trying to grind it out to get to a full-time position as a real estate agent. But I have to say I feel lucky that I'm not licensed for 1 year right now with this starting to occur. But again, you got to show your worth to the buyer.
Yeah.
And why you think you need to be paid X, whether that's by the buyer or hopefully, as it still remains up until August 17th, you got to show your worth to the seller side too, in terms of when you submit your offer,
Right.
and what you're asking for compensation wise, if they're not willing to compensate you. And then Sean could certainly chime in, but there's going to be, I think, there's going to be 4 scenarios when you submit an offer. After August 17th, there's going to be one where you'll find out whether or not the seller's willing to pay a commission. Then there's going to be one where maybe they're not, and you're going to ask for it anyway. Then there'll be the third where they're not going to pay at all, and you're going to have to lean on, unfortunately, that buyer's agency agreement you have with your buyer. And the fourth might be you're not even going to go look at that property because your buyer has instructed you not to show them properties where the seller is not paying.
Which they can
Right.
do on
Correct.
the agency agreement, which is great.
Right. So those are, I think, unless there's another alternative, I think those are going to be the 4 outcomes.
No, I think you've hit it. Anything?
Yeah, I mean, same thing as far as reaching out to all your clientele and letting them know, explaining to them what is going on. Even listings that I've gone on that I'm going to be getting soon. Okay. Even letting them know what is going on, even though it's not going to affect them, just so it doesn't happen and down the road they're turning around going, hey, why didn't you explain that to me? I had no idea what was going on. If I'd known, maybe I would have held off, whatever it may be. But yeah, listen, there's obviously going to be change, and I think, like Mike said, the strong will survive. There's always change, and you got to adapt to it.
Right.
But I just want to point out one more thing too. So I know we're talking about what's going to happen August 17th, and we're June 24th right now. So I've had a couple new listings over the last 3 or 4 weeks, and as Sean just said, I'm telling these sellers now because they always have had the opportunity or
Right.
the ability to decide what they want to pay out a buyer's
That's right.
agency.
Because commissions have always been
Correct.
negotiable.
Right.
So my last two listings that I just put up within the last 2 weeks, I explained everything in detail, what they can do, and they said, well, why wouldn't I pay out a buyer's agency commission? Because it's enticing as many
Right.
real estate agents as possible to come and show my property. I said, ding dong, exactly.
Right.
So, I know what I plan to continue to say to sellers, and hopefully it does not fall on deaf ears. I mean, unfortunately, you're going to have a couple,
That's right.
outliers that are just they know better than everybody,
Right.
and they probably are going to find out the hard way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, so from my perspective, again, managing an office of 100 plus agents, and just being involved as I am throughout state, national, and local, you're hearing all these horror stories that, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to do it. Well, it's really, we're just taking a step back because, we had buyer consultations. I got into this business in 2001, and I mean, you didn't go and meet somebody just because the phone rang and met them at a
Right.
property. They came into the office, you
Right.
went through the MLS, you picked out listings for them, and you had a consultation, right? They knew what services that you were gonna do to provide for them in order to, search for a home. Today, because of social, because of the internet and everything, now the phone rings and we're jumping in a car to go meet some complete stranger at a house. We don't know if they're pre-approved. We don't know if they can even afford it. We don't know if they got a gun. You know what I mean? And so we have all these safety classes and all this other stuff because we don't do buyer consultations. And so I just think that's what it means for us. We're just going to go back to doing buyer consultations. I also think, when you talk about the compensation part of it, because that's the second change that we're going to see, is that all compensation is going to be removed from the multiple listing services, right? So now, how do you know? Your buyer wants to see 5 properties. How do you know what properties are offering compensation? Because there's nothing listed. What are you going to do? What do you do? How do you find out?
Reach out to the listing agent.
There you
Text, call.
That's right. And we all know that, listing agents are bad with, responding to your texts, responding to your calls, even to get feedback from a buyer's agent is almost impossible, right? So how are you going to get that information, right? So I think what you said it, you're gonna be trying to communicate with the listing agent. I think for the listing side of that, they are gonna be more communicative, right? They are gonna respond to your text or your call to say, yes, Mike, we're offering compensation to your buyer's agent.
And I maybe you can answer this because I'm not sure what the answer is, but say I put up a new listing, right? And it's August 18th. So it's the day after where we gotta change everything. And I want everybody to know that my clients, the sellers, are offering a commission. I know it can't go through the MLS, but is my office or your office allowed to send a blast email to other offices letting them know that the seller of this property is going to consider offers with requests for commission?
So I'm not sure to that direct answer on that, but and there's still some clarification that needs to be made because we were also told that as part of the settlement agreement with NAR that a broker's website would be able to promote the compensation.
Right.
But we're still not 100%
Okay.
sure on that. But the one thing
So
I
like
will
your Coldwell Banker website or Remax
Remax,
or
right.
Keller
That's right.
or whatever, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
But we're not sure
Okay.
if that has been officiated or not. But the one thing I can tell you is that in that case of your new listing, all you have to do is put a simple statement in your agent notes of your listing to say, if your buyer's offer requires compensation, please indicate on said offer.
I thought we weren't even allowed to say any of that.
You can. You absolutely can put. You can't put a fee. You're just making that statement
Okay.
to say, if your buyer's offer requires compensation, please indicate on said offer.
I got you.
So that means your listing, you're presenting him with an offer.
Right.
In your offer, your contract of sale, you're going to put, I'd like to be compensated X, to Coldwell Banker Sean Thompson. You presenting that offer on his
Sure,
behalf,
right.
you're going to say, okay, look, here's the offer.
Sure.
It's X dollars. But we also would have to pay X dollars to
Right.
the buyer's agent.
I'm
The
sure.
seller, again, can say, no, I like the offer, but no, I don't want to pay compensation. So it's all about that negotiation, right?
Okay.
That's really the crust of this settlement, or terms of this settlement, is it's all about keeping commissions negotiable right up until the end and clear
Sure.
with not a mandated or mandatory number or amount.
Right.
Right. So because you might ask for a certain percentage, and the seller says, I'll accept the offer, but I'll only pay X percent.
Of course, yeah.
It's all negotiation. So you'll learn. Last year, Triple Play at Triple Play, they had a class and they were talking about, before the settlement was even announced, they were talking about things that you could do if compensation ends up being removed from the MLS, things that you could say, things that you could do. I noticed there's a broker in Ocean County that as soon as the settlement was announced, they started putting 0 into the MLS and putting such comments into the agent remarks to say. So now you know that, yeah, they might be willing. There's no definitive answer, yes or no, but at least you know that if you require compensation without the buyer having to pay, you can put it right into the MLS.
We were talking before we went on camera, and I was wondering, when you go to sit down and have your potential client as the seller sign the listing agreement with you, is it going to be like it's always been where they're going to agree on X amount, but let's just say, kind of like what you just stated, it's going to be in the private notes that, if a buyer wants to submit an offer with a request for a commission payable to their agent, to put that in the notes or put that in the contract. As a listing agent, if I know my clients are willing to pay X to a buyer's side, what happens if those sellers determine they don't want to pay that percentage because they're not getting the offer amount that they wanted?
Well, so that's the conversation that you're going to have with the sellers, right? Because the thing is that, again, if the seller's compensating, right, the belief is that the seller was ultimately netting more money, right?
Sure.
They were getting a higher ask price and a higher sold price because they were paying it out, right? So now, from the buyer's perspective, well, now if the buyer has to pay and the house is listed for X, then the buyer's probably going to take that into account. Well, now the seller's not paying X out,
Right.
so I have to pay, so I'm going to make my offer X percent lower, in order to compensate.
I've
that.
tried to argue that with many real estate agents, and they told me I'm crazy. Like, it's almost like a FSBO,
Right.
right? So if you go to a house that's listed and they're paying out way less than
Right.
would be double on a seller side and a buyer side, now they're only paying one side, you generally know that they shouldn't be getting the price that all the other comps got.
That's
because they're only paying half
Right.
of what
That's right.
everybody else paid. And that, I guess, is another question is whether or not our MLS is going to allow, when a deal closes, for us to put in the MLS listing if there was a commission payable on that deal and how much it was payable, so that we can kind of rely on that to determine, when we're comping properties out, whether or not that seller paid a full amount of a commission, or if they paid
to help
Correct.
identify for us what the actual net was
Right,
to the
yes.
right.
Yeah.
No, I agree, and so that's a good topic, and so maybe our CEO and our leadership team will be watching this podcast, and maybe they'll take that back to the MLS committee.
How about unrepresented buyers? How are they getting into homes?
So, when you talk about buyer agency agreement, right now, New Jersey has rolled out their exclusive buyer agency agreement. There'll be a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement as well, right? My thoughts are that some of the least experienced agents, some of the older generation that's fear of change and challenge, will tend to use those, because then, if they're getting that signed, they can put it in, and all they have to do is track the properties that they showed them, right? And maybe, so if somebody else has an exclusive, right, as long as they have a non-exclusive, they're still going to be protected,
Sure.
but just on the properties. So you're going to see both non-exclusive and exclusive buyer agency agreements brought forth. One of the things that I heard agents talking about is, like, when you go and have that consultation with the buyer's agent, what kind of timeline are you going to put on that buyer agency agreement?
True.
Like, are you going to do like a 6
6
month, like you would do a listing, or you do something shorter? Like, what are you thinking?
I was thinking 6 months, because that's kind of already the standard in a sense.
Yep.
For a listing agreement. But it's a good question, because I don't know. Right now it's tough to find a home.
Right.
You could be out there looking for a year,
Right.
2 years,
And
and try to find something.
And so, some of the things that I've been hearing is that, for a client that you've had in the past, a repeat client,
Sure.
whatever, that's going to be easier to
Right.
do, right? Because
Exactly.
they already know how you work
Right.
and the services that you provide, right?
Right.
But for that new buyer that's coming into your realm, right, who doesn't really know you, maybe had been recommended by a previous client, but never physically worked with them, what I'm hearing is that agents are saying, I'm going to sign a 7-day agreement. This way, you're going to get to know me, and I'm going to get to know you. Because again, as hard as the market is to find a buyer home, do you really want to be, tied to somebody
Locked into-
who's not really
Yeah, but is
ready,
it-
willing, and able to buy?
like the term.
Because
I
you
don't
can
know.
always negotiate the term after that 7
Yeah.
days.
I mean,
The term for like me, if I had a buyer sign an agreement for whatever 3 months, and they decided that we weren't a good fit after the first 2 weeks, go ahead. I'll let you right out.
Okay.
If you don't want to work with me, that's perfectly fine. I would do the same thing on a listing of mine because it's very rare that I've had issues with sellers and buyers in my career. I mean, I've had a couple, like maybe like 3 or 4. But if somebody doesn't want to work with me, then I probably don't want to work with them either.
Right.
So for me, it's more so like what they're comfortable with. Now, with that being said, though, like I don't want to, as Sean said, this is like a tough market to find a house in. So, I mean, I've had buyers that casually look. Like I just had a friend who literally was casually looking for like the last 6 years. So if we were literally looking at like a house like every like 7 or 8 months or
Right.
something. So it to me, it's almost like a nuisance for me to have to keep re-upping a buyer agency agreement like every 6, or let's just say it was a month. Like I'm not doing 1 month agreements.
Right.
I'll probably do like 6 months or a year.
Right.
And if the buyer's not happy with me and they want
You're
out,
just-
that's fine.
Okay.
yeah, I think that's
Okay.
makes sense.
I think from the perspective of the agents who are so fearful of this change of this buyer agency agreement, I think they want to take the path of least resistance. I think they're just not prepared to have that conversation because again, it's not just about signing the agreement. It's about being compensated
Right.
by that person.
Right.
And I think a lot of the older generation of our members are fearful that they're not going to be able to provide the services that they think they need to provide, but yet they've been doing it for 25, 30 years very successfully. So it's not like they're not providing service, they're not, proving their value. They're doing it in their own way. You may do it differently because of technology and social media and stuff like that, where they may not be on par with all of that, but they're providing their services in a different way. We have many old school realtors, that we work with each and every day, and they're doing quite well. So that's the thing. I don't want the members to think that, just because this change is coming, that it's going to be a detriment to all of our members. You're going to learn it and you're going to get through it. Hopefully you have, a good broker in your office or a good education team with your brand that will be able to help you, talk yourself through it, to get through it. So,
Well, I think too with the social media thing, like a lot of buyers, even if they don't know you, they kind of
no.
going through your social
Yeah.
media pages, they're gonna know you before they've even met
That's
you.
right.
So that's really the beauty of social media. It's like I've literally had listings that I've shown up to that I'm showing a buyer to, and the owner will open the door and go, "Hey, I saw you on TikTok. I love all your videos," and I'm like, "Really?"
And that's the thing, like
It's pretty cool.
if somebody's recommending you, right, that's the first thing somebody's doing. They're going on social to see
Yeah,
where you
they're gonna
are.
check you out,
Right.
of course.
Absolutely. So
I do the same thing with some potential sellers.
That's right.
I'm going to do some. You got to do some.
I think
recon every
everybody
once in a
does.
while.
That's right.
Everybody
That's right.
does, but that's just the world
So-
we're in.
So again, as we move forward into this new role of buyer agency agreement and this new role of not compensated, we talked about like it's gonna create more communication with the listing agents for sure, right? And hopefully those listing agents will be receptive to keep the buyer's agents in the know. And the buyer agency agreement, I think, look, there's 18 other states across the nation that have been using it for decades without incident. So the thing is that if they're doing fine and have adapted to it, then we should be able to.
Sure.
Right? And I think that, the biggest thing is that from the buyer agency agreement that was drafted or crafted, we took from the most successful states, bits and pieces of their
Right.
agreements, because that's what worked well for them. We did add in the buyer agency agreement about the retainer. I can tell you that that probably will end up being removed from the
I
file
would,
grab,
I
because
would,
nobody.
I would never do that.
Georgia does it very successfully.
Yeah, it's not,
but nobody wants to
even
hold
not-
escrow
I can't in
in
good
the
conscience
state
do
Right,
it.
right.
Well, then the other thing is like you're gonna start like if you charge per hour. I mean that's a nightmare. You're gonna start. What are you gonna clock in and clock out when you like meet clients, the
Right.
property, and so. But I understand. I mean, truthfully, I've never had a buyer agency agreement signed with any of my buyers I've ever worked with. So, and I understand the apprehension because I've felt the same way. Now it's kind of like I'll just tell them like it's required, but. I understand, like you're saying, about some older agents that are not comfortable or they feel uneasy about doing it. But it's as far as I'm concerned now, as an exclusive buyer agency agreement, it's a requirement, right? Like the one you mentioned before, the non-exclusive, is that almost like a?
It's going to be a requirement also.
Yeah, right. I
Just-
don't know if it was like
it's like an open-ended
Zillow
listing.
like touring agreement or something.
No,
that
it's
they're
like
proposing.
an open-ended listing.
Okay, so I mean. That is required, but what the terms are is obviously negotiable,
Correct.
and you're going to have to prove your worth to
That's
somebody
that's
that
exactly right.
you shouldn't have to prove your worth to somebody that you already previously worked with. If it's a referral, then they probably already have a pretty good idea about whether or not they want to work with you and maybe what the scale may be as to what you're going to request, but. It's negotiable.
And again, it's really no different than what you do on a listing appointment, right? You're
No.
walking into a listing appointment, you're providing them a comparative market analysis on what their home is worth, but more importantly, you're providing them with the services that you're going to utilize to market that home and what you're going to do, right? The service that
Sure.
you're going to provide, because that's why you're asking for a fee. So now, yes, it seems funny, sounds funny that we're now having to do this for a buyer and ask them for a fee, right? But again, so there's a lot of talk about the fee structure on the buyer agency agreement. And so already the mortgage bankers are already taking that into consideration. And, on Fannie and Freddie, you can get up to 6% concession on a home sale, right? On a conventional loan, you can get up to 5%. They're already talking about increasing Fannie and Freddie or FHA to 9% and conventional
to allow for
8%,
it,
right.
so that it can allow for. The VA has already stepped in and said, yes, they will allow the compensation, because it's just going to be treated
Right.
as a closing cost. It'll be listed on the HUD as a closing cost, buyer's closing cost, to be paid to,
The
X.
property still has to appraise.
It
Right,
does.
I was just
Yeah.
thinking
Absolutely
that,
does.
it does.
Absolutely does. So you'll, no different than regular concession, you'll increase the purchase price to include whatever those closing costs are and be done with it, right? So again, it's not really like the buyer's gonna have to come up with that extra percentage at the time of closing. They're gonna end up financing.
I mean, I honestly feel like this. I don't want to say this is a moot conversation because it's definitely not. But I feel like there is going to be a lot less instances where I think the seller is not going
Right.
to consider
Well, that was gonna be
paying a buyer's agency.
That was going to be my next question. So again, through the headlines, we heard doom and gloom that, this is the end of sellers paying compensation, right? What's your take on that? What's your feel, right?
I think they're
this
still
is
gonna-
our market.
I think they're
Monmouth
still going to pay it
counties.
out.
Do you see many sellers saying, "Oh, if I don't have to pay, I'm not paying"?
Well, I've seen it like now, even before August 17th, when this is law, where there's agents that have a 0 in there, but they're few and far between. And
So do you think? But let me ask you this then: do you think the 0 is there now because they told the seller they didn't have to pay in order to secure the listing, or
Yeah, I don't-
or that the seller actually told them, no, I don't want to compensate.
I mean, I know of a brokerage in Monmouth County that quite a few of their listings now are starting to show up as a 0% for buyer's agency commission. I don't know if that's, them banding together but, I just think that it's, as we stated before, there's got to be some sort of, enticement or
Right.
reward, or you got to get. I always tell my sellers, when I tell somebody what I think a house is worth, when I give them that CMA, that is not. I'm not like inflating that number to give them room
Right.
to negotiate. So I always tell them that more than likely that number, and this is even before COVID happened, like you list it at what it's worth, you're probably going to go over asking. And I feel like by you not pricing it properly and telling somebody that they're not going to pay a buyer's agency agreement, you probably just slashed 60% of the agents that are going to show that property, because either the buyer doesn't want to come out of pocket, or it's, I don't know what the other reason is, but that's to me,
Well,
that
real
would be
estate
the.
professionals shouldn't have to work for free.
I understand that, and I don't. What I was gonna say, and what I was stopping myself from saying, and I'm gonna say it, is that unfortunately there are some agents that don't want to make pennies on the dollar,
Right.
and I don't either. But I'm not gonna not show a property
That's right.
to a buyer,
Right.
because I've been in the position years ago where I took much less than I typically make, and I just took it on the chin, and I took my commission check, and I didn't say boo
Well, that-
to the listing agent.
And I'm assuming you're referring to the Fox and YHD days where they came out of the gate with.
Well, I don't think I was
that-
around, because I've only been licensed since 2014, so
Oh,
they were
no,
probably.
Not
they-
allowed to
they-
disclose
they were-
that
They were
information.
gone. But yeah, so I mean, they came out of the gate with that strict percentage, and we heard rumblings through the market area that agents weren't going to show those properties. But then you're not filling your duty as a realtor, if you're not showing those properties. So-
I hate to say that it shouldn't be like that, because it shouldn't. But there's always going to be a few bad apples
Of
that
course.
do
You're
what's
absolutely
in
right.
their best interest instead of putting their client first.
You're
And-
absolutely right, and unfortunately, there's probably nothing that we can do about that, moving forward. I think, again, I think that with the compensation changes, I feel the same way as you two, that I don't think we're going to see a lot of our sellers saying, oh no, I'm not offering, if I don't have to, I'm not paying it, right? I don't think we're going to see any real change in that. I think sellers are still going to be willing to compensate a buyer's agent, and it's just a matter of letting the buyer's agent know that we're
Sure.
we're going to
Right.
do that.
I mean, listen, if I'm selling my own home, and anybody's selling their home, they want the most amount of people coming to their
That's right.
front door and through that front door as possible. And that's how you do it, is you pay out a buyer's agent commission.
That's right.
And I think most people are going to realize that and do realize that, so.
Do you know? Do you know what the cusp of the initial lawsuit was against NAR and the other brands? Do you?
Well, I thought it was that we were all colluding to fix the commission.
Well, that's what it rolled into. But so it resulted from a home seller in Missouri,
Missouri.
who was selling her family home of 30 years. And when presented with listing agreement, it basically had 3 boxes. You can choose, Mrs. Seller, you can choose 7%, 8%, or 9%. And with those percentages, there were mandatory buyer agent fields, right? So out of that, whatever box she chose, the buyer's agent would also receive certain percentage of that total percentage. And the seller questioned the agent and said, well, what if I don't want to pay the buyer's agent that much? And she was responded to by the realtor to say, you have no choice. And she took it to court. And that was the crust of
Interesting.
the lawsuit. So there you go, one bad apple spoiled it for all of us.
Well,
That's the way I look at it.
I gotta be honest with you. So there's, we joke around on Facebook every so often, and you like to, twist the knife in my back and tell me I'm doing something wrong and whatever. So there's been
And
times.
now I'm on the real estate commission.
I know. So like I've posted some stuff before on Facebook about me having a listing coming up, and I didn't have a coming soon agreement, and I think I got like $100 fine or something. So that's not why I bring up Facebook is that I see people discussing the commission lawsuit, and then the things that they're saying, it's just like you can't be serious. Like you didn't there's a reason why this lawsuit happened, and there's a reason why everything's changing as of August 17th. And I'm not really sure why you, as this agent posting about this, don't understand that, or maybe you got to get your head out of the sand, and maybe also should not put that in print because you're gonna get yourself trouble.
Well, and I think it goes back to the original, start of this conversation where we were talking about how do you think this will affect our membership? And, again, newer agents in the business that don't truly understand, they're going to have some fast education, to get through to be able to understand it and continue moving forward. And some of the more senior members of our association, that and they may say, what, it's time for me to retire or step down. And so I think those that don't fully understand the ramifications of what has occurred over this last year, or in this case, 4 years,
Sure.
I think they do have their heads in the sand, and they probably won't lift them out, right? And they'll just fade away into the sunset. So.
Well, that's where Mike and I come into it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, look, the thing is that we're always grateful for the new players that do come into the field, right? And we're happy to see them succeed and see their name out there and see that they're growing and progressing, right? And I mean, that's a good thing.
Of course.
Because attrition is always happening, not just in New Jersey, but across the nation, right? I mean, the average age of a real estate professional is 57, 58 years old across the country. So again, you're talking 15 years to retirement, and they're going to be gone. But so back to the buyer's agency agreement. So we talked a little bit about, what you guys will do when you're presenting that buyer's agency agreement and timelines and terms and everything like that. And so, one of the things I wanted to talk about is that New Jersey Realtors has introduced a bill called the Consumer Protection Act. And basically within that bill, it talks about a revised consumer information statement defining the roles, right? And it will now include the buyer agency agreement to be mandated. And it will also include, big thing, seller's disclosure. We are probably one of the few states across the nation that don't require a seller's disclosure. So now that will be mandated, where right now it's just the flood section of that disclosure. And I know many brands have just created a document with those exact line items, but now it'll be the entire seller's disclosure. And I want to hear from you guys since that will now be mandated, but let me just continue what else is in that bill. And then also in that bill will be a rule change where an agent can be paid by both parties in the transaction, which is currently a real estate commission rule and reg that they've addressed with them, but now becoming part of the legislation will help fast track that, so that when you're showing that property, and you're the listing agent and you're representing both sides, you'll be able to be compensated if dual agency is not being offered. And we've also introduced in that bill is designated agency. So designated agency allows the broker of the office to designate an agent to represent either party so that both parties can be paid, right? So that's a great law. It's been passed through the Senate. It's come out of committee. And now it will go before the Assembly, and we hope to have it on the governor's desk sometime the first week in August for signature, so that we can beat that August 17th deadline. With that being said, from a seller's disclosure standpoint, right, there's a lot of confusion or misconception, about your role as a professional when you're taking that listing, and actually, being aware of mechanicals, structurals, right? At least to what your eye can observe and to your extent of knowledge, right? Some have more knowledge with certain
Sure.
things than others, right? And like you said before we started filming, was that, there are agents who, they step away from the seller's disclosure because they don't know anything, right? And but yet it is their fiscal responsibility to be aware of any potential defects in the home. They should be viewing that property as if they were a buyer to that property, as a listing agent, right? So your thoughts on that in terms of I'm sure you guys are already doing it and taking notice of anything, and if the seller's not pointing it out, you're pointing it out to the seller, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I go on a listing appointment, I don't bring any brochures with me or anything. I want to know about the house.
Right.
So I tell them, I said, I'm not being rude. I'm listening and I'm writing notes in my iPhone.
Right.
I want to know the age of the roof, if there's any leaks. I want to know the age of the boiler or the furnace, central air. How old's the water heater? All those. Do you have any known issues? Do you have any termite damage? Do you ever treat the house? All that stuff. You're in a flood zone. And I always, maybe I'm gonna get in trouble for saying this, but I just tell them, I need you to fill out the seller's disclosure. I don't give them an option. I said, I need you to fill this out because this is gonna help the buyer know the condition of your house. They're gonna know the age of the roof. They're gonna know the age of the mechanicals. They're gonna know, if you're in a flood zone, if you have a survey, because you checked it off, you checked the box off, and then I'm gonna upload the survey on the document section in MLS. So I don't tell them they have to, jokingly. I do tell them it's really beneficial if you fill that out because it's just more information we can provide to the buyer.
And I think that's the right language. I mean, that it's beneficial. It's beneficial to the buyer, right? And the more information you provide to the buyer, the better informed they are to make a more precise offer, right? If your seller's asking for X dollars for a house, doesn't provide a disclosure, right? And then the buyer's thinking, well, what's wrong with this house? So why would I offer him what he's asking? Maybe there's something wrong, and I want to make sure that I can fix it. So
Yeah, I always like pulling an Oprah request too, because if they don't know the information, be like, well, hey, look, you might not remember, but you took a permit out in 2015 and got your water heater replaced. Or, listen, I've been through enough homes where the dates are sitting there on a lot of them. The permit sticker's sitting there saying, hey, it looks like you're
That's
this
right.
stuff. So that's valuable information, So, yeah, absolutely. The more you know, the better.
Yeah, I'm usually probably for the first 6 or 7 years of my career, I was printing out the listing, the paper listing, and I was carrying one and I was giving one to my client when we got to a house. I stopped doing that probably since COVID, and I'm looking at my phone, and I'm going over the Flex app, and I'm pulling up the disclosure, and I'm talking to them while we're looking at the house about the age of items, or like Sean said, sometimes people don't take a permit out, but there's the manufacturer's date on the
serial number, right?
Right. So, and that's stuff that you just learn over time. Sean's much more handier than I am. I know you kind of brought. So he's this is funny. Sebastian Maniscalco, when he's asking his friend, he's like, "What did you do this weekend?" He's like, "I built the deck." He's like, "You built the deck?" He's like, "Yeah, that's Sean."
I know.
I'm like, "Sean, what did you do this weekend?" He's like, "Oh, I'm renovating this bathroom." I'm like, "Dude, I'm having a problem screwing in a solar light on my deck." And so, but no, as time goes on and as you've been in so many houses and you know what to also look for too, the seller's disclosure may not say that they have a roof leak, but then you look up on the ceiling of the second floor and there's staining on the ceiling. There's definitely something going on.
Right. And I think,
Yeah.
So the point to the whole seller's disclosure topic was the fact that, by having the seller's disclosure, utilizing the seller's disclosure, and what you said about when you're walking through with your buyer, right? You're providing that service or that information in that case, to help the buyer be better prepared to make an offer, or educating the buyer, and that's what it's coming down to, right? Both the listing side of the transaction and the buyer side of the transaction are really going to be two separate entities where you as the real estate professional are going to have to provide different types of services to each one of those parties involved, and hopefully be able to bring them together, to a meeting of the minds and get the property sold. So before we end, I hope this was informative to you guys, our membership in both Monmouth and Ocean County. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any one of us. But again, don't be afraid of the buyer's agency agreement. Don't be afraid of the changes that are coming. Don't be afraid of not knowing if there's compensation offered. It's all going to work out. We're going to get through this, and I think it's going to make for a much better market for all of us. We're seeing an uptick in inventory as we move into the summer, which is typically slowdown. I know your listings are up. You're putting some listings together. From an office perspective, I know the numbers are up. And I think even from an association, I think our numbers are up year over year for the month of May in terms of listings. So it's getting better. I just read today, interest rates are looking like they're being poised to drop very soon because of the uptick of inventory. So that will be promising for all those buyers out there. Anything you guys want to add before we close?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we hit on everything. And do you have something to say, Mike?
No,
Passing the baton.
No, I mean, as far as like buyers are concerned, and this is not like a self-serving statement, but a lot of people have tabled their search because they're worried about interest rates. And I truthfully, and again, I know it sounds self-serving, but when rates go down, there's going to be a slew of buyers that hop into the market, and it's just going to alleviate the issues with the values being high, and it's going to be tougher for somebody to land a home rather than if they're willing to buy a house now at a 6.87% interest rate, as opposed to wait until they get down to 6.5 or 6.25, and then there's just more buyers out there. So
right. It's all going to drive those prices up because new buyers are going to come into the market. And you're going to have more bids than you would right now with just the current buyer pool.
Yeah, I just submitted an offer for my clients on a house that got listed in Wall Township. It's been on the market for 3 or 4 days, and the deadline's right around now, whatever time. It's almost 5 o'clock. There's probably like 10 offers on this house. So
it's crazy. It's
Yeah,
crazy. And it's not going to get any better. But if we can get some relief from the interest rates, I think that would be great. So, listen, I want to thank you both for taking time out of your day
You're welcome.
and driving down to
Thanks
our
for having
great
us.
Tom's River studio and spending 45, 50 minutes with me. I also want to acknowledge that today's episode is sponsored by our very own affiliate member, Barbara Vecchiarelli of Counselor's Title, providing you with your title to your dream home since 1996, and they are servicing all 21 counties across this great state of New Jersey. So thank you. Hope to see you again soon, and have a great day.